Let's go ahead and get started so that we can cover a lot of material. I see we have interpretation. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. We're going to close the back door. People will wander in, and that's okay. So this morning, I did a presentation that was very heavy. It was on elder and disability abuse. And that has a lot to do with what's wrong in the world and what we need to do to fix what's wrong in the world. This is more about what we're doing right, okay? So nice I get to end the day on a positive note instead of ending it on that negative presentation. So this is called Sectors of Success. It was actually originally titled something else, but that term is copywritten. And so even with the copyright, we had to change the name of it. Aging to 100 in New Mexico. My name's Roberta Farley. I'm the Clinical Operations Manager for Adult Protective Services, which is housed under Aging. I've been there for a while with a specialized unit. Our job is to work on complex cases. So that's one of the most important things that we see in our unit. That's a little bit about me. Before I came to New Mexico, I worked in violent crime for the state of Texas for 13 years. My background's in clinical psych. So I was speaking with one of our classmates here. I was a statistician. So historically speaking, I did a lot of statistical work and research design in the process of doing all this violent crime work. So when I quote research for you, you can feel assured that you're getting it from somebody who knows what they're talking about, okay? I will never get up here and give you opinions. Everything that's up here will be based in fact, all right? All right, so what are the objectives of today's course? We're going to, by the end of this presentation, know a better understanding of the concept known as graying of America. Have you guys heard of that? Who's heard of that in this room? Great, couple of people, okay? If you haven't heard of it, you're about to hear a lot about it, all right? We're gonna have a clearer understanding of the challenges, the ethical considerations, and the potential solutions around a very large, increasing older population, okay? Which I'm actually very excited about. I was raised by my grandparents, so I don't have some of the ageist beliefs that a lot of people have about older generations. Ageism is part of what we're going to talk about today as well, a little piece of it as we get into some of the more complexity of the material. We're going to talk about the blue zones. Has anybody seen that Netflix special on blue zones? Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to discuss how New Mexico is trying to become that, to model that blue zone structure, okay? Don't worry if these concepts are foreign to you now, they will not be by the time I'm done, all right? So, what is this graying of America? What we're referring to is the increase in the percentage of older adults living in the United States, okay? So, we did some research with the US Census Bureau, and their projections are as follows. People over 65 will outnumber children by 2034. What year are we in? 2020. This is a capacity evaluation we're having right now. What year is it? What day is it? Who are you? Okay, no. Okay, 10 years. I don't know how fast 10 years goes for y'all, but it goes pretty quick for me, okay? So that's coming up on us fast. 77 million older adults versus 76.5 million, respectively, children, okay? That's a lot. We're talking about 500,000 people at that point, which will just increase exponentially as time goes on. So that has to do with the lower fertility rate and longer life expectancy for people. 100 years ago, how old were people when they died? 50, 200 years ago, you're lucky to make it to, I don't know, your 38th birthday or whatever. That's not the case now, right? There's going to be significantly more women than men due to women generally living longer by about 3 to 5 years, depending on what research you read, okay? So men, if you're like, woohoo, it's coming, all right? A lot of this has to do with the baby boomer generation, right? So one of the largest generations in US history. If you're a baby boomer, represent right now. Where are my boomers at out here? Excellent. Okay. I'm Gen X, so you know. So I'm right under you. All right. One of the largest generations in US history. We all know how it got that way, okay? All baby boomers will be older than 65 by 2034. Everyone. That's in 6 years, okay? Compromising 21% of the population. So this is a great video for you to watch. We don't have that capacity in here in this room today. I apologize for that. But this is called 2 Centuries of Population Change in the United States. So if you were to just Google that video, you could take a picture of it. You can do whatever you want. It's going to explain how the population went from a pyramid to like these pillars where things are looking very different and kind of lopsided than what we're used to with the inception of our United States, okay? So I encourage you to go look at that. Also, for the sake of time, this presentation had to be truncated, shortened a little bit. It's normally an hour and a half. So I encourage you, any video, go watch it, okay? But I'm gonna explain it to you either way, so it's not a problem. Okay, here's some projections. By 2030, international migration will overtake birth rate as the driving force of our population's growth, okay? We've always had immigration in this country. It's how we have a country, right? But birth rate used to be higher than immigration. We were making more kids than we were bringing new people into the country. That's no longer going to be the case in 2030. We're going to be making less kids and bringing more people into the country. Immigration trends are shifting. It used to be Latin American countries. We used to think about Mexico, Cuba, right? All those countries. It switched to Asian countries. Does anybody have an idea of potentially why that could be the case? Think about what's going on in those countries. They have the same thing happening that we do. They have population explosions. Yeah, so the reason why there's a shift from Latin American to Asian countries is because Asian countries are actually becoming highly overpopulated. We're going to get to some demographic statistics in a second, and you're going to see how overpopulated they actually are. So people are coming for more opportunity, just like we have historically in this country, right? By 2050, 58, let's not shorten it, okay? The US will cross the 400 million person mark. I don't know about you, but Costco is already too crowded for me, okay? And we're going to hit 400 million, right? By 2060, 1/4 of Americans, that means 25%, will be 65 and older. The number of people over 85 will triple and become the fastest growing age group in the United States. And we will add 500,000 centenarians. And if you don't know what a centenarian is, that's our wonderful over 100 population, okay? All right. Around the globe, let's look at some of those statistics. I just mentioned those. 7.9 billion with a B people live on Earth. 61% of those people, of all the 7.9 billion on the whole planet, think about this, live in China and India. And we wonder why they're coming here. Like, that's a lot of people all living in the same place, if you want to do that math. Only 4.5% of them live in the United States. The world population is going to rise to 9.3 billion by 2050. Okay, that should scare the heck out of you when you think about that. How long did it take for us to get 7.9 billion people on Earth? For as long as humans have existed. But in a mere 25 years, we're going to add another almost 1.5 billion people. That is exponential growth. It's like they're cloning or spawning or something, right? The US is aging faster than most countries, but we are not the number one. Japan holds that record right now. So they actually could tell us something, and they will when we get to the blue zones, about how to deal with a population that is aging rapidly, right? Because they have a pretty consistent kind of framework for how they treat their older adults, and we could learn something from that. By 2050, people over 65 will reach 40% in Japan. 40%. Okay? So that's almost half the population if we think about it. And then here's some other trends. By that point, 2050. In Germany, that will be 30% of the population. In Italy, 31% of the population. Canada, 26.5%, and Russia, 26%. So this is not a unique phenomenon that the United States is experiencing, okay? So what are the challenges? Okay, these come from research. These are not like personal opinions that I developed, all right? Because of people getting older, and obviously you work your whole life, and what's the thing you want to do when you're done working? Retire, right? I'm in my mid 40s and I'm already thinking about, okay, at what age and how am I going to do it and the financial stuff, right? Because you have to, right? As that happens, there's a decline in the working age population by choice. People don't want to work anymore. They want to retire and do other things like travel and spend time with their kids and their grandkids, potentially, other hobbies. That's why we work so hard, so we can do that eventually, right? But in doing that, that's going to cause a possible shortage of qualified workers. That can lead to a decline in productivity, higher labor costs. The economists will tell you that could be delayed business expansion, and then that pushes up wages and inflation, okay? Remember, business model, okay? There's an increase in the dependency ratio. That's an economist term, dependency ratio. Government benefits are being funded by shrinking pools of workers. So as we have a lot larger population of older adults who may not be in the workforce anymore, that's a lower tax revenue, but there's higher spending on things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera, okay? And then there's changes to the economy. So age is a factor in how we spend money. I don't know how you spend your money, but I don't spend it the same way I did 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I spend my money very differently now than I did back then, right? Our priorities shift, our goals change, right, as we move through life. Then on the right side of your screen, you'll see increasing healthcare costs. That is related to labor issues, like not being able to staff caregivers is a major problem, right? Staffing facilities like skilled nursing facilities, and then geriatric specialties. There's an ageism presentation I do when we talk a lot about the medical world. Nobody wants to go into geroscience. I don't know what it is, but most medical providers, that's not the specialty they pick, working with older adults or disability, okay? They pick things like OBGYN and brain surgery and other types of jobs, but we don't seem to be able to recruit people to geroscience and gerontology. It's very difficult. And so that's an increased cost to consumers, because if we have less of that and a higher demand, supply, demand, right? All right. So what are some ethical considerations that we have to think about? The way this impacts those of us that are aging in this population. Ageism. We just talked about that. So there's this thing in sociology. That was my other major on my bachelor's degree, sociology. We call it social competition, us versus them, okay? So this happens when there's a group who appears to be taking all the resources, okay? When one group is using a lot of the resources, we start to think negatively about that group. Oh, they're eating all the food, they're taking all the housing, and it can become like a discriminatory, even aggressive kind of problem for our group. It can lead to violence. Then we have this thing called healthcare rationing. I want to be very clear. I am not advocating for this. This is the opposite. But this has been around for quite some time. This guy Callahan wrote these articles and these books a long time ago. And one is called Setting Limits, Medical Goals in an Aging Society. And this is what this guy proposed. The lives of younger adults are more valuable than the lives of older adults. That's what he said in his book. We should use an adjusted quality of life. So because you're older, your quality of life isn't the same as somebody who's younger, right? Well, of course that's not true, but that's what this alleged scientist said, right? Medicare and healthcare for older adults should be palliative, not curative. So let's just keep you okay but we're not going to try to fix your problem. That's what people have been advocating for a couple of decades. That's a real ethical problem. I know many, many people who live a better of quality of life at 70 than they did at 25. Age cannot be the determining factor in your quality of life. But we've got people like this saying this kind of stuff and policymakers supporting it. All right. So we've got an uphill battle. One of the other issues is access to insurance. So you all know we have managed care in insurance, right? As we are aging, companies may decide to change our benefits. It can become very expensive. Has anybody here had to buy medical insurance like on their own or know somebody that has? Is it affordable? Or have you even looked at your paycheck to see what they're taking out of your insurance if you're still working? It's a lot, right? Just to have a premium for medical insurance. And some of that stuff isn't good, the insurance we get. They're going to start applying, if we don't do something to limit this, more regulations. Think about pre-existing conditions. Does anybody remember the world before we had exclusions for preventing people from not getting insurance for pre-existing conditions? That was not a good world to be in. You could not get insurance if you had a medical condition, right? And then there's financial insecurity. So there have been proposals to raise the Social Security and Medicare age requirements. We already did. What did it used to be like 20 years ago? Does anybody remember? At one point it was 60. What was it recently until the past few years? 65, right? Now you could do an early withdrawal of Social Security and take a pay cut, right? Now it's 67. If you're in my age group, you can't until you're 67. And by 2040, they're proposing at 70. 70. So what are some responses and solutions to those ethical considerations? Let's start with business practices. Attitudes about older adults must change within the workforce, period. Within corporations, within government associations, all of that. So what we really need to do is start allowing some flexibility for people. You know, as we're getting older and we're thinking about retiring, but maybe we don't really want to retire, but we don't really want to work 40 hours a week anymore because we want to balance our life, right? What could we do? All right, let's start allowing some flexibility in schedules, right? Instead of this strict 8 to 5 stuff. Let's talk about telecommuting, right? Letting people work more from home, letting people work shorter shifts, right? Encouraging people to stay in the workforce for longer, okay? Investing in worker health care. I don't know if you know, but aging and long-term services, there's a clinic in Albuquerque for workers that they can go to. It's not everywhere because, of course, smaller cities can't support that, right? But that's an example of how a workplace can support healthcare. I used to work for a company that would bring vaccinations in for us. We didn't have to go get our shots. They brought them in. And if we wanted them, we could have them right there, okay? Let's move away from seniority-based pay systems. You know what I'm talking about? Like the longer you've been there, the more you get paid, regardless of your skills. Who knows that guy? It's like, why does this guy still work here? Like, he doesn't know anything. Well, he's been here for 37 years. It's like, well, maybe he should have not been here for 37 years, right? Let's talk about rewarding people for good work instead of just being there a long time, right? Now, on the public policy of things, we're talking about government at this point. Why don't we incentivize retiring older, right? So now people are like 60, 65 is the average age they're retiring, right? Some of that's lined up with Medicare and being able to access Medicare and Social Security. Some of it's not. Maybe a tax break. If you work longer, you get into a lower tax bracket or you get a huge tax deduction for doing that, trying to encourage people to stay in the workforce that are still willing and able to do so, right? We need to reform tax and benefit policies to encourage that. We need to replace mandatory retirement ages with ability-based practices. So I was embedded in law enforcement for a period of time. And what I can tell you about them is they have mandatory retirement ages, even at the state level. It was 55 at one of the ones I worked for. Some of these law enforcement officers had plenty of work and physical ability left in them. I mean, 55, we're not talking about like 105, right? They're still able to do everything that they need to do, but they had this mandatory retirement policy. So what they'd do is they'd retire and then they'd rehire and come back as a desk job. And they wouldn't like that because they want to be out on the street, being a law enforcement officer. That's an example of things that we do that do not encourage people to stay in the workforce, okay? So utilizing working age immigrants, I'm not on a political thing here and I work for the state, so I'd like to keep my job, okay? So I'm not gonna make any political statements, but what I will say is a lot of labor by immigrants drives some of our economy, right? So if you think about like migrant farm workers and things of that nature, right? That's driven a lot of our economy. So if we're not having kids, like who's going to pick the onions? You know what I'm saying? Like who's going to do that kind of work that people don't want to do historically, right? Incentivize volunteering. You're like, what? Okay, maybe I don't want to work anymore. I don't want to go to this 9 to 5 job, 8 to 5 job, 8 to 10 job, but I do want to help people. I'd like to go do some work in the senior center, right? I want to be an ombudsman, or I want to work in a homeless shelter, okay? What incentive do I have to go do that right now? Can you think of any incentive other than it's in me and I want to help people that would encourage people to want to work for free and volunteer? Can you think of one? Yeah, because there isn't one. You know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, that's why it's like crickets in here, right? Because there isn't one. So why don't we give you a tax deduction if you volunteer? Let's take a cut right off the top if you're willing to volunteer and you can prove that you did that kind of work. How do we keep people out there and doing the work that needs to be done? And then investing in technology and tech skill training. Technology is changing rapidly. Who has had AI training in the room? Has anybody been offered training in artificial intelligence? 1, 2, 3, 4. I saw 4 hands. And I have not been offered training in artificial intelligence. I have to do it on my own, right? Yeah, same. Okay. She did it on her own. So it's really just 3 of you. Okay. So that said, how are we going to move forward in technology if we're not investing in training people about technology, right? How about healthcare? What are we going to do about healthcare? Has anybody been to the doctor lately? Is that a fun experience in the waiting room with 47 other people all squished in closer than you are in here, like sardines in a can, right? All sick, waiting to see the same rheumatologist. The last time I went to the rheumatologist, I sat there for 3 hours to get 3 minutes with my doctor, right? Let's start with digital transformation. We have this thing called the internet, right? And it's capable of helping us with all kinds of things, like learning how to use appropriate devices, right? In the doctor's office setting. These people are so smart, but yet are not utilizing technology in their own facilities that would help their patients and clients coming in. Do we need to help people learn how to use some of that technology? Maybe they've never been offered training on using that particular portal, right, at the doctor's office. What's so hard about having somebody sit, an office manager with them and helping them learn how to use the technology so they can use the portal from home, right? You invest 10 minutes in something, it'll pay off for a lifetime. How about practice visits? You can just check in with the secretary, see if you can do it. Yeah, it's good. We're ready for the appointment on Tuesday. Then people don't miss their appointments and don't have to drive, right? Digital monitoring. Has everybody heard of a virtual caregiver in here? There's a program, right, where you can actually utilize technology. So if a physical person can't be there, there's a way to still monitor an individual, right? Okay. So I have to talk about some personal stuff on this next section, because if I don't, it's hard for me to get the point across. Facility improvements. The last time you went to a doctor, were you able to locate large print materials that someone with a visual impairment could actually read? First of all, did you encounter any materials that you could read in the doctor's office? Right. Except some crummy magazine with like snot on it that nobody wants to pick up, right? Because some kid was playing with it, right? Okay. We don't have any of that. How about Braille? Has anybody ever seen Braille in a doctor's office? Oh, okay. So I guess there's no blind people coming in to get seen by doctors, right? Better facility maps and signage. So I had to have surgery in July. And I'm okay, in case you were wondering. But I had to have surgery in July. And I was sitting in the waiting room, all like fasting and angry and hungry and freaked out, about anesthesia and surgery. And I was trying to find the bathroom. And they had this sign, it was about this big, with a map. Okay, I have 20/20 vision, and it was right there. And I couldn't read it. I had to go up and look at it. Okay. So, how do we expect other people to be able to utilize that, right? An ADA modification. So this is where I get on my high horse a little bit. At the end of her life, my grandmother was utilizing a wheelchair, okay? And she couldn't really stand well anymore. She had 2 blown knees, just like me. And I would take her every month to the infusion center for her infusion treatments, and she had to be weighed, okay? And she had to have her blood tested before they would do this. How do you weigh somebody in a wheelchair that can't get out of the wheelchair and stand on the scale? How do you do it? Well, you have wheelchairs that can go on scales. There are specific scales for that. But the doctor's office or hospital has to invest in the cost of that, where they roll the chair up and then they deduct the weight of the chair and then they get your real weight, body weight, right? So how would my grandmother ever know if she was losing weight if they can't weigh her? And isn't that a problem if your nutrition is affected and you're losing weight or gaining weight and it's causing you metabolic problems? So why don't we have that, right? I went to an orthopedic for my 2 blown knees, and I was so impressed because when I sat down to get knee injections, the table came up. It like freaked me out. It like lifted up. I was like, oh my God, what's happening? I died in this office. I'm going to heaven. No, it was just a table lifting up, but I had never seen or experienced that before. That should be common. That should not be something that impresses me when I go to a doctor's office, right? Her dentist didn't even have an automatic door. So has anybody ever done the wheelchair shuffle through the 2 doors where you're like, okay, let me get in this door. And then you put your foot in it. And then you're like, how do I get this wheelchair? Okay. And then you get that in and then you got to get the other door, right? Okay. That's what I had to do every time we went to the dentist's office until they figured out, crud, we should put an ADA door out there on the front. And they finally did. But it took that, me having to, hey, come out here, help with this to get that done. So how many offices are like that? Doctors' offices and hospital facilities. We need to address known clinical issues. Do you know what the end age of most clinical trials is in this country? Where do they stop including you? At what age? 65 in general, 60 for some of them. Just a piece of knowledge for the women in the group. Until 1993, women of childbearing age could not be included in clinical trials because it might impact their ability to have children. And that's what's really important, right? So they didn't until 1993. So we're even further behind women than men in medical literature. But we're both equally impacted because if you're over 60, and you're suffering that condition, how do we find out anything about somebody in their 70s or their 80s or their 90s if they're not included in the clinical research, right? We need to track developing medical conditions. So as we get older, what starts to happen is medical providers start to ascribe our symptoms to things they think we have, right? I started developing some weird symptoms, probably an autoimmune disorder after 40. The first thing every doctor said when I walked in their door is, it's menopause. And I said, yeah, it could be. But could we run some blood work or something? Because maybe it's not. Maybe it's one of those other million things that it could be that's not. And guess what, folks? It's not menopause for me. Might be for someone else. but it's not for me. So we start just making assumptions as you get older about what's wrong with you without truly investigating and tracking the symptoms you're experiencing. And then the last thing is prevention, education, and geroscience. So in my earlier session today, something miraculous happened. A woman approached me. She just got her master's degree in gerontology at 50. That's when she graduated with it because she felt the calling because there's so few gerontologists in the world. And now she's dedicated her life to that. By some of these standards, I guess she's supposed to be done in 10 years. So good luck getting an appointment or whatever. But the reality is nobody's investing in the science of studying or treating older adults, which looks very different than treating middle-aged adults or children, okay? And then there's healthcare reform. So now we're talking about public policy, government stuff. Strengthen public health. Public health. Everything shouldn't cost so much in the private healthcare world, insurance world, to go to the doctor and get treatment. Strengthen public health. Create a qualified aging workforce. We're going to talk about one of the programs that New Mexico APS has that's doing that. Redesign long-term facilities and supports to look more like a place where people live instead of a place where people exist and go to die, okay? Shift to patient-centered palliative care. And you're like, wait, Roberta, you said palliative care is bad. No, it's not bad. When people need palliative care, we're not talking about hospice. We're talking about comfort measures, right? That could be on hospice, maybe not on hospice. But what happens is now it's doctor or provider centered. They know what you need. They decide what you need instead of asking you what you need. You wind up with this like recipe. There's a cup of hydrocodone and a couple tablespoons of losartan, you know, and they give you all these drugs and these medications, but they're not really improving your comfort or your quality of care. That's got to go away. So how are we going to do that? Okay, so if you saw the Blue Zones special, this is going to look familiar to you. Most of you didn't. So I encourage you to go watch this because it is fantastic. Okay, so the term Blue Zones, which is copywritten with the little R up there, and hence why I couldn't title my presentation that, was a term coined by Dan Buettner. He was is a National Geographic explorer and fellow. This started in 2004. 2004. 20 years later, 3 of you in here have seen and heard about the documentary. Okay, that tells you how much focus people actually have on this topic. He did an expedition to Okinawa, Japan. And he made a mission of exploring other regions of the world with high longevity when he saw the power of Okinawa and how people live and how powerful it is in terms of growing older there, okay? So he identified these 5 zones, okay? You notice there's only one in the United States, and it's a very specific enclave of groups, all right? So we're gonna go through each one. First one's Barbagia region of Sardinia. So we're talking about Italy area. In the mountain highlands, I want you to start thinking about what these things have in common, okay? Because it applies directly to all of us and how we live our lives. This is the highest known concentration of males over 100 years old on the planet, okay? And what did we say about men? Do they die? He's back there going like this. And I'm like, no, I did not say that about men. But what I did say is they die earlier, right? Their life expectancy is shorter. So to have that many men over 100 is something else, okay? The second one is Ikaria, Greece on the Aegean island. They have the second lowest rate of middle-aged mortality. You can't get old if you die when you're 45, right? And the lowest dementia rate on the planet. So what are they doing to prevent neurocognitive disorders? We're going to get there. The third one is Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica. Lowest rate of middle-aged mortality. High rate of men over 100, not the first. You see how those two things go together? If you don't die in your middle ages, you're probably doing something that's going to lead you to live a lot older life, right? Seventh-day Adventists. Their largest numbers near Loma Linda, California. They live 10 years longer on average than their other North American counterparts because of something that they do, okay? We're going to talk about that. These groups have a lot of things in common. And then, of course, there's Okinawa, Japan. Females over 70 are the longest lived population in the world in Okinawa, Japan, okay? Fantastic. So how are they doing it? What are they doing? You're like, show us. Okay. They're doing the Power 9. So what this was called, this research was reverse engineering longevity. So when we say reverse engineer, what we mean is they looked at all the factors that led to those high longevity rates, and they reverse engineered how they got that way. So now we could tell you what you need to do to get there, okay? This little chart on the other one kind of puts things into categories. So the blue is belongingness, right? The yellow is moving naturally. The green is having a purpose. And then the turquoise or teal color at the bottom, if you're colorblind, I'm sorry. It's the ones at the bottom, is eating wisely, okay? So here's the 9 principles. Moving naturally. So we're not talking about getting on the elliptical for 20 minutes every day, okay? We're not talking about lifting weights. We're talking about gardening, walking to go to your activities, to get your meals, cleaning your own home, doing things of this nature, moving in a very natural way that burns energy and doesn't stress your body. All that stuff is hard on your body, those other forms of exercise. When you move naturally, you're doing what your body already does, okay? Number 2 was purpose. Why get up in the morning? Why am I here? If you cannot answer that question, you're probably not going to be in one of the blue zones, because without purpose, people don't live very long. That's just a fact. You have to have a drive to want to live, right? 3 is downshift. And this is the term that they use to talk about reducing stress. Who's been to Europe? Okay. What do they do in Europe in the middle of the day? That's pretty common unless you're in a touristy region. Siesta, right? You'll hear that in Mexico. You'll hear it in Spain, Italy, right? They work from a certain time, then they shut down for a period of time, and then they come back and they open back up again. And they might work into later hours, but they find a time of the day to de-stress. They either take a nap, they go have a glass of wine, they spend some time with their family, they might go pick up the kids. They do things to reduce and de-stress. That includes prayer, naps, meditation, all kinds of things, but they're taking the time to do it during the day consciously. We don't do that here. It's like work, eat through that meeting, choke it down, swallow it up, and okay, that's kind of our methodology in the United States, and it's not healthy for us. So we need to change some of these kind of mindsets we have. Number 4, the 80% rule. Stop eating. How about just stop eating when you're full would probably be a good rule, but when you're 80% full is a better rule. Satiety doesn't take too long in the human body. After chewing for 15 or 20 minutes, no matter how much you've put in your system, your brain thinks it's satisfied. That's why you don't get as hungry when you chew gum. Do you guys know that? Now, eventually your stomach will start to argue with your mouth and you'll need to put food in you, right? The plant slant is part of eating healthy. In most of these, actually in all of these regions and other regions where people are living longer and living healthier with less health conditions, they eat very differently than we do. They don't eat much meat. And when they do, it's very lean meat and lean protein, like fish, seafood, maybe chicken. But like beef is not a big thing in these places. They eat mostly plant-based proteins, a lot of legumes, beans, things like that. Okay, it's healthier, it's easier on your body. Number 6, wine at 5. Who likes their glass of Cabernet, I mean, in this room, or Chardonnay? Yeah, okay. I'm more of a dark Merlot drinker myself. But so this is moderate, regular alcohol. Daily, 1 to 2 glasses. I had a friend, she's my age, and she was in Italy. And she's like, an Italian told her in this beautiful Italian accent, which I will not taint, but told her, you know how we knew that you were Americans without you ever opening your mouth or saying you were an American? She's like, my clothes. And they're like, no, something else. Huge. What? That huge water bottle that you're carrying around. Hydrate, hydrate, God, you Americans, just drink some wine. They walked around drinking wine all day long, right? Now, I'm not saying you got to drink wine all day long, but that was very common, except with the Seventh-day Adventists. Okay, that's the one population that didn't participate in this, but they do have strict eating habits. So, all right. And no, you can't save up all of your 1 or 2 glasses and drink them all on Saturday. It doesn't work like that. But every day a little bit, and it's usually in a social function with friends, with family. So it adds to the next piece, which is the right tribe. These are small groups of lifelong friends. They've had these friends since they were little kids. So they don't have 252 followers on Facebook or friends on social media, or a bunch of people that they see once a year. They got 5 friends that they would literally give up their life for because they've been with this tribe for all that time. They can depend on each other, okay? Then we have loved ones first. So that's all family, but it includes their aging populations. That is a major tenet in those areas, that your family comes first, period, regardless of what's going on in your life. And that includes grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, right? Actually, they're the most important in those cultures. And then belonging. What they found is most people in these environments, it's like 90%, have some kind of faith-based community. And it doesn't matter what kind of faith. It could just be an internal spiritual belief you have that you share with other people. It doesn't have to be an organized religion, but something, it goes back to purpose, right? That also draws on purpose. That's what they found, the commonality in all these regions, all right? So let's talk about New Mexico and where we're going with New Mexico. We have a little over 2,114,000 people here. So that's like 2 large cities in Texas, okay? Right? So we're not a huge state, but 2 million people are pretty valuable. Like, we care about our fellow New Mexicans, right? I want you to start looking at the shift in the numbers, because remember what I told you earlier? You're going to see it in these shifts. 19.8% are people over the age of 65. It's almost 20%. We're going to get to that 25% pretty fast here, aren't we, that we were talking about? 21.3% are less than 18. Our children, over 65 is catching up. But the real number that should kind of be highlighted here in terms of we're not producing a lot of children, 5.1 are less than 5 years old. 5.1%. That number would have been significantly higher 20 years ago, 40 years ago, and definitely the baby boomer population, right? We know what people were doing back then. 9.2% are foreign-born persons. And we say foreign-born, we don't mean undocumented. We just mean they weren't born in this country. I don't know what their immigration status is. I just know they weren't born here. But they came here, and they're contributing, and they're part of our population. That's getting close to 10%. So, I mean, we're talking about, over 200,000 people. About 50-50 male to female ratio, which is going to change dramatically when the age starts to increase. It's like 50.3% for women. Don't ask me if it was sex at birth or if we're talking about gender versus sex. I don't know, because the US Census did not give me that information. I don't know how they decided if you were male or female. Let's put it that way, okay? So what are we doing here? There's some programs I want to tell you about with our agency that we're doing to try to turn us into a blue zone in New Mexico. These are all the special programs. It's not all of them, but it's the ones I have time to highlight in this presentation, okay? We're going to go through each one of them. Older Community Health Worker Program. Has anybody heard of this? I'm sure you have, right? So I do some instruction for this particular group. So these are all community health workers older than 55 years old. They are intentionally recruited to be over this age to be able to reach out and work effectively with their population, right? They're trained as community health workers. Remember, I told you it's over 100 hours of training that you have to receive. So this is a pretty innovative collaboration. It's between New Mexico Aging and Long-Term Services Department, New Mexico Department of Health, the Office of Community Health Workers, that's where they're housed, and then UNM, University of New Mexico's Community Health Worker Institute. So they all collaborated to help develop and continue this program. So community health workers are frontline workers. What their focus is on social factors of care, getting out into the community, educating people, working with people, and they use that knowledge that they have. They use the knowledge of their own community over decades of working in the community, and then their connections that they have developed over time in public education. That helps them to break down some of the systemic barriers that we're dealing with. It's a fantastic program, and I have nothing for respect for it. So if they ever ask me to teach a presentation virtually, I'm like on it, because that is going to accomplish something in our community. The next one is New Mexicare. You heard about that this morning, right, from our governor. Did anybody go to the session this morning on New Mexicare? Okay, a couple of you. All right, so for those of us that did not attend, what we're struggling with in this state is caregivers. And then we have this income problem that if you're not in the Medicaid eligibility, okay, how many of you know how much money you can make to receive Medicaid? It ain't much. It's like $2,000 a month, you know? I mean, most people can't even live on that, you know, in this day and age, right? So what they've done is they've raised that income threshold, so we can include more people. So the income guideline is higher. Actually, if I heard the governor right this morning, that we're removing the income requirement. I work here and I wasn't even aware of that. So that's awesome. The goal is prevention, okay? Provide financial support and training to family and friends that are providing services. So you live in rural wherever, New Mexico, anywhere New Mexico, and you cannot find a caregiver. But you have this wonderful granddaughter that has been helping you and that you trust, and she's going to school and she wants to be your caregiver. We could pay her now to be your caregiver, and that solves the whole problem. So you're like, well, wait a minute. What about background checks? And you were just talking about they're not trained properly. No, we do that. We require them to get 12 hours of annual training and training to start, and a criminal background check. And the compensation is up to, depending on how many hours they work, $1,400 a month. So for a student who just wants to take care of their grandma and make some money, that's a pretty good way to do it if grandma trusts their granddaughter, right? The applicants have to be 60 older and need assistance with just 2 ADLs, activities of daily living. So maybe they're struggling to ambulate, move around the home, or maybe they're struggling to take their own bath. Okay, just 2. That's all you need to be eligible for this program. The link is right down there to the flyer. All the links are going to be in here. Then we have some special APS programs that are within adult protective services. One is care transitions. That unit just came under me in July. Has anybody ever dealt with care transitions in this room? Nobody even knows who they are. Their role is to transition people out of higher levels of care back into the community. So maybe they were in a skilled nursing facility and they don't need to be anymore. So they safely help them transition out of there and back into the community where they can live a better quality of life and potentially avoid abuse. Did y'all know that in a skilled nursing facility, if you were in my session this morning, you heard this. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't know this because they don't like to report on this. 66%, 2/3 of people that work in skilled nursing facilities self-reported that they have either abused or neglected one of their clients. 66%. So we want them out of there and in here with us, right? That's what Care Transitions does. So they work with individuals, families, facilities, guardians, if they have them. So they assist with trying to locate the right kind of housing, assistance programs. So we're talking Medicaid eligibility for resources, public education, and then making sure that transition is safe, the house they're going to. They cross-report with us a lot when something's not safe. Then we have the clinical operations unit. Rebecca, wave, she's in the back. So that's my advisor here in Albuquerque. She is a a clinical operations advisor. That's our behavioral health people. That's our unit. Okay. So on complex cases where we have neurocognitive disorders, we're looking at guardianship, substance use, other behavioral health conditions, mental illness. We consult on those cases and we do direct services with those clients. So in that way, we're doing some preventative work and harm reduction work. So that provides the oversight that we're looking for, the right tribe, people involved in your life that are there to support you and that are going to be available to you if you're in need of assistance. Okay. That's what both of these units do. They come from a harm reduction perspective. How do we mitigate the risk of harm? Okay. Those consultants, they provide direct services. And then of course, quality assurance on our work. So we're guaranteeing that our adult protective services team is doing good work and that they are doing the work they need to be doing in the community. Okay, so how about people that are lonely? We even have a special program for that in APS. It's our Pen Pal program. So we just started this about a year ago. One of the things my grandma hated when she wasn't mobile anymore was she couldn't go out and get her own mail. And then they would come in and the caregivers would tell her, okay, here's a bill. Here's it's her mail. Just give her the mail. She could read, like, just give her the mail. Like, just because she can't go get it from the mailbox doesn't mean she can't evaluate what mail she's looking at. She would get really excited if she got a card from the grandkids and it was mostly just bill, medical bill, water bill, medical bill, water bill, right? And no card. But the day the card came, my God, she was so happy. So we know that when the people are alone or isolated, they don't have family anymore, or maybe they choose to live alone because that's how they like to live. A lot of times they can become very isolated. The National Institutes of Health reports that adults over 65 in that population, severe rates of loneliness range anywhere from 2 to 16%. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but when we're talking about like millions of people, 16% is a lot of people, right? And what do we know that loneliness leads to? It's a major predictor for depression, which can lead to suicide. Exactly. Especially in men. It's more pronounced in men over the age of 65. So at any one point in time, up to 32% of people over 55 felt lonely. The clinician in me is like going to cry. Nobody should feel lonely. We have like 400 million people on this planet and you're lonely? Like, how is that possible, right? Loneliness and social isolation is a huge contributor to A&E, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Okay? So in some studies, over half of nursing home residents without cognitive impairments felt this persistent loneliness. And they live in a facility with other people around them. Okay? But they don't have any real connection. Nobody seems to care. So what did we do? We started this Pen Pal program. You don't even have to have an APS case with us. We just have to know about you. Okay. And then we tailor this Pen Pal program to you. So the participant gets to decide, like, they'll say, like, I'm this religion, or I don't have any religion. Don't send me religious stuff, right? What holidays they participate in, what type of things they like, their hobbies. And our interns and some of our staff write handwritten cards, hand-colored, hand-drawn cards, and we send them at those intervals. And people can write us back if they want. They don't have to. They can just receive the information. Anyone over 60 can participate regardless of being involved with APS, irregardless. And then many cards are handcrafted and they're really nice and they're based on the individual person. So this helps to combat loneliness. This is part of the right tribe, by having people in your life that you believe care about you. Because no matter how someone cares about you, if you don't believe they do, it doesn't really matter, right? So how are we doing all of this? Where do we get this money, okay, to do this? So several years ago, we decided to partner with the federal government in what's called a GSA, Government Services Arrangement, and they monitor these types of programs, okay? So Health Service Department administers our Medicaid program. APS, we're on our 4th year of doing this, and that's help us hire more staff and get the pay equitable so that people want to work for us instead of for that other better paying job down the street. Okay. So the federal government matches our expenditures for Medicaid. So we have to fill out these studies asking us what we did and did we serve Medicaid patients. And then when we do that, we get money back, and that fuels more programs. Several of these programs did not exist when I started 2.5 years ago, and now we have them. Okay. We're also investing in food security programs so that people always have food, regardless of whether they're an APS client or not. That way we can help prevent and we can keep eyes on them as we're delivering food, right? So in these ways, that is what New Mexico is trying to do to get us to be a blue zone and living to 100 in this country, okay? What questions do you have for me? These are the references for this presentation. And when I say I do research, I mean I do all the research, so. Yes. All these services, none of them have exclusions. She asked about, are they available to tribal? It doesn't matter what your affiliation is, if you're a tribal member, a non-tribal member, if you fall into those categories that were on that screen, it's irrelevant. Anybody is eligible for those programs. Okay. Okay, so there's surveys about the session that they want you to, she's going to hand those out. If you can return them to the Aging and Long-Term Services booth when you are done. Yes. Ah, yes. So the question was, is there like a target date to see results like on the Blue Zone projects? No, we don't have specific target dates because a lot of it's kind of in inception and some of it's beyond our control. Like in Sardinia, the temperature is always 75 degrees. So you can always go outside and pick your own vegetables. Okay, we're in Albuquerque. It's about to snow. You're not going to pick your own vegetables out here, right? So there's certain things we can't accomplish. But the major thing was, I don't know if you remember, we had a NAPSA conference, National Adult Protective Services Association conference here in Albuquerque recently. Before that conference happened, Dan actually talked at one of our events. And New Mexico is on target just in terms of the way that we treat older adults in this community and the initiatives that we're trying to do to get into a blue zone kind of space. So, but this didn't happen overnight in these 5 regions. They've lived like this for decades. So we have some catching up to do. So anything else? Anything about APS or anything that we didn't cover? Yes, ma'am. Care transitions. Nope. That's a service. So she's talking about, for those of you that can't hear, care transitions. So care transitions actually used to be under the Office of Ombudsman, but they came over to Adult Protective Services under our harm reduction unit. And so no, you don't have to have an APS involved case. Now, if they detect abuse, neglect, and exploitation, they'll have to report, obviously. So that's a good crossover that we have. But yeah, no, all you have to do is put a call into the ADRC and they'll reroute that referral. If you go to the Aging and Long-Term Care website, let me throw that one up there for you guys too. You can always get I have cards. So if you didn't get to take a screenshot of that, that's okay. I can give you a business card. That's how you get in contact with us. If you go to the main website or any of those socials, as the kid calls them, you will find all of our programs there. You'll find care transitions, everything, the community health worker program, all of that, okay? How much does weather have to do with the blue zone? A lot. Who has arthritis in here? Okay. Who's starting to hurt a little bit right now? Okay. Got 2 knee braces on right now, right? I got 2 blown knees. I was an athlete. So you can't really get out there and garden when it's 25 degrees outside, right? But you can find other things to do. So the thing that they're talking about with blue zones now, if you go watch the Netflix special, is we're going to have to modify it to like our regions, right? So what are things you can do that is natural movement, but you can do it in 25-degree weather, right? So it might be things physically inside a home or inside a different environment. You can't garden outside, but I can make a little greenhouse tent and I can grow tomatoes all year round, right? So there's ways to modify if you don't have a natural environment that's conducive to blue zone. So yeah, but weather does have something to do with it. We just got to get creative. How did we create this many people without coming up with new ideas, right? So what else? Anything else? I think I'm going to hit a hard stop here pretty soon. So we good? All right. If you need any information from me, do not hesitate to come get my business card, whatever you need. All right. Thank you all so much.